The plane hummed steadily at 30,000 feet, a mechanical lullaby for most passengers. But for the Johnson family, the atmosphere was anything but soothing. The air was thick with tension, a palpable weight pressing down on their chests. The scent of recycled air mixed with the faint aroma of coffee from the galley, but it did little to calm the storm brewing in first class. "Excuse me, ma'am," the flight attendant Linda sneered, her voice dripping with condescension as she leaned over the seat of 12-year-old Tamia Johnson. "Are you sure you belong here? First class is for paying customers, not, well, you know." Tamia's mother, Dr. Keisha Johnson, a renowned pediatric surgeon, clenched her fists under her blanket. Her husband, Marcus, a successful tech entrepreneur, placed a calming hand on her arm, but his jaw tightened. Tamia, however, sat frozen, her small hands gripping the armrests, her eyes wide with confusion and hurt. The soft hum of the plane's engine seemed to grow louder, drowning out the murmurs of other passengers who had overheard the exchange. Linda smirked, clearly enjoying the power she held in this metal tube in the sky. She leaned closer to Tamia, her voice a venomous whisper. "Maybe you should go back to economy where you belong. I can arrange that for you." The words were a knife, twisting deep into Tamia's heart. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Keisha stood up, her 5 feet 10 inches frame towering over Linda. "How dare you speak to my daughter like that?" Her voice was low, but it carried the weight of a storm. "You have no idea who we are, but I promise you this isn't over." Linda rolled her eyes, unfazed. "Oh please, save the dramatics. I've dealt with your kind before." She turned on her heel and strutted back to the galley, leaving the Johnsons in a suffocating silence. Tamia's lower lip trembled as she looked up at her mother. "Why does she hate me, Mommy? Did I do something wrong?" Her voice was small, fragile, like glass on the verge of shattering. Keisha knelt beside her daughter, her heart breaking at the pain in Tamia's eyes. "No, baby," she whispered, brushing a tear from Tamia's cheek. "You did nothing wrong. Some people are just broken inside. They hurt others because they can't fix themselves." Marcus reached over, his large hand enveloping Tamia's. "We're going to get through this, sweetheart. Together. Always together." But the damage was done. The humiliation, the rejection, the blatant racism, it was a wound that would take time to heal. And as the plane continued its journey, the Johnsons sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, their hearts heavy with the weight of injustice. As the plane descended, the Johnsons' minds were far from the upcoming vacation they had planned. Keisha stared out the window, the clouds below a blur of white and gray, mirroring the storm raging inside her. Memories of her own childhood flashed before her eyes. Memories of being called names, of being told she wasn't good enough, of being made to feel invisible because of the color of her skin. She had worked tirelessly to rise above it, to prove them wrong. She had become a doctor, a healer, a savior of children's lives. But no matter how high she climbed, the world always found a way to remind her of where it thought she belonged. Marcus too was lost in thought. He had grown up in a rough neighborhood, where opportunities were scarce and dreams were often crushed before they could take flight. But he had fought tooth and nail to build his tech company, to create a better life for his family. And yet, here they were, on a plane being treated like second-class citizens. Tamia, meanwhile, sat quietly, her small hands clutching the stuffed elephant she had brought with her. She had always been a bright, cheerful child, full of curiosity and wonder. But now, her innocence had been tainted by the cruelty of a stranger. She replayed Linda's words over and over in her mind, each repetition a fresh cut to her young heart. When the plane finally landed, the Johnsons were the last to disembark. Linda stood at the door, her smile fake and plastic as she bid the other passengers farewell. But when she saw the Johnsons approaching, her smile faltered, replaced by a look of disdain. Keisha stopped in front of her, her eyes blazing with a fire that could melt steel. "You will regret what you did today," she said, her voice low and steady. "Mark my words." Linda scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Whatever. Have a nice day." She turned away, but not before Keisha caught a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. As the Johnsons walked through the airport, Tamia clung to her mother's hand, her small fingers trembling. "Mommy, are we bad people?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Keisha stopped and knelt down, her heart breaking at the question. "No, baby," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "We are not bad people. We are strong, we are kind, and we are loved. Never let anyone make you feel otherwise." Marcus placed a hand on Tamia's shoulder, his touch warm and reassuring. "We're going to get through this, sweetheart. Together. Always together." But as they made their way to the baggage claim, the weight of the day's events hung heavy on their shoulders. The humiliation, the rejection, the pain, it was a burden they would carry for a long time. But little did they know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would test their strength, their resilience, and their love for one another. The days that followed were a blur of anger, pain, and frustration. Keisha couldn't shake the image of Tamia's tear-streaked face, the sound of her daughter's trembling voice asking if they were bad people. It haunted her, a constant reminder of the world's cruelty. Marcus too was struggling. He had always been the rock of the family, the one who stayed calm in the face of adversity. But this was different. This wasn't just an insult or a slight, it was an attack on his family, on his daughter. And it cut deeper than anything he had ever experienced. Tamia, meanwhile, had become withdrawn. The bright, cheerful child who had once filled their home with laughter was now quiet, her eyes distant and sad. She no longer wanted to play with her toys or watch her favorite cartoons. Instead, she spent hours sitting by the window, staring out at the world with a look of confusion and hurt. Keisha and Marcus tried everything to cheer her up. They took her to the park, bought her ice cream, even planned a special day at the zoo. But nothing worked. The sparkle in Tamia's eyes was gone, replaced by a shadow that seemed to grow darker with each passing day. One evening, as Keisha tucked Tamia into bed, she noticed a piece of paper sticking out from under her pillow. Curious, she pulled it out and unfolded it. Her heart sank as she read the words scrawled in Tamia's childish handwriting. "Why do people hate me? What did I do wrong?" Tears filled Keisha's eyes as she looked down at her daughter, sleeping peacefully but still carrying the weight of the world on her small shoulders. She felt a surge of anger, not just at Linda, but at the world that had made her daughter feel this way. The next morning, Keisha made a decision. She couldn't let this go. She couldn't let Linda's cruelty go unpunished. She would fight back, not just for Tamia, but for every child who had ever been made to feel less than because of the color of their skin. She called the airline and demanded to speak to a manager. She recounted the incident in detail, her voice shaking with anger and frustration. But the response she received was less than satisfactory. "I'm sorry you feel that way, ma'am," the manager said, his tone dismissive. "But we have no record of any such incident. Our flight attendants are trained to treat all passengers with respect." Keisha's blood boiled. "Are you calling me a liar?" she demanded, her voice rising. "I have witnesses. My daughter was humiliated and I will not let this go." The manager sighed, clearly annoyed. "If you'd like to file a formal complaint, I can give you the information. But I can't promise anything will come of it." Keisha hung up the phone, her hands trembling with rage. She felt helpless, powerless. But then she remembered the words she had spoken to Tamia on the plane. Some people are just broken inside. They hurt others because they can't fix themselves. And in that moment, Keisha realized that she couldn't let Linda's brokenness define her. She couldn't let it break her family. She had to rise above it, to show Tamia that they were stronger than the hate. But how? Weeks turned into months and the Johnsons tried to move on with their lives. But the incident on the plane continued to linger, a dark cloud that refused to dissipate. Keisha threw herself into her work, finding solace in the children she helped heal. Marcus focused on his company, determined to create a legacy that would make his family proud. And Tamia slowly began to heal, her laughter returning, though it was tinged with a sadness that hadn't been there before. Then one day everything changed. Keisha was at the hospital, preparing for a surgery, when her phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus. "You need to see this." Attached was a link to a news article. Curious, Keisha clicked on the link. Her eyes widened as she read the headline, "Airline employee fired after racist incident goes viral." Her heart raced as she scanned the article. It detailed the incident on the plane, complete with eyewitness accounts and a statement from the airline. But what caught her attention was the name of the flight attendant involved. Linda Carter. Keisha's breath caught in her throat. Linda had been fired. But that wasn't the shocking part. The article went on to reveal that Linda had a history of racist behavior, with multiple complaints filed against her over the years. But what truly stunned Keisha was the revelation that Linda had been married to a high-ranking executive at the airline, a man who had been covering up her misconduct for years. The plot twist? That executive was none other than Linda's husband, who had recently been ousted in a corporate scandal. With him gone, the truth about Linda's behavior had finally come to light. Keisha felt a mix of emotions, relief, vindication, but also a deep sadness. Linda's actions had caused so much pain, not just to her family but to countless others. And now she was facing the consequences. But as Keisha read further, she realized that this wasn't just about Linda. It was about the system that had allowed her behavior to go unchecked for so long. It was about the people who had turned a blind eye, who had chosen to protect their own rather than stand up for what was right. And in that moment, Keisha knew what she had to do. Keisha decided to take action. She reached out to the other passengers who had witnessed the incident on the plane, gathering their statements and compiling a detailed report. She contacted a lawyer, determined to hold the airline accountable for their negligence. But more than that, she wanted to make a statement. She wanted to show the world that racism in any form would not be tolerated. And she wanted to teach Tamia that standing up for what was right was worth the fight. The case gained national attention, with news outlets covering the story and social media buzzing with support for the Johnsons. People from all walks of life shared their own experiences of racism, creating a wave of solidarity that couldn't be ignored. The airline, facing mounting pressure, issued a public apology and announced new policies to address racial discrimination. They also offered the Johnsons a settlement, but Keisha refused. She didn't want their money, she wanted change. As the case progressed, Keisha found herself becoming a voice for the voiceless. She spoke at rallies, gave interviews, and even testified before Congress. Her message was clear. Racism was not just a personal issue, but a systemic one that required systemic change. And through it all, Tamia watched her mother with awe and admiration. She saw the strength, the courage, and the love that Keisha poured into the fight. And slowly, the shadow that had been hanging over her began to lift. In the end, the Johnsons didn't just win the case, they won something far more valuable. They won their dignity, their pride, and their sense of self-worth. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, more united, and more determined than ever to make a difference. Keisha continued her work as a pediatric surgeon, but she also became an advocate for racial justice. Marcus used his tech company to create programs that supported minority entrepreneurs. And Tamia found her voice. She started a blog, sharing her experiences and offering support to other kids who had faced racism. She became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the face of hate, love and kindness could prevail. As for Linda, she faded into obscurity, her life unraveling as the consequences of her actions caught up with her. But the Johnsons didn't revel in her downfall. Instead, they chose to forgive, not for her sake but for their own. They refused to let her hate define them. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. Life will throw its worst at you: betrayal, rejection, humiliation. But your worth is not defined by how others treat you. It's defined by how you rise above it. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting, it's about freeing yourself from the chains of hate. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is choosing to walk away from what hurts you, even if it means leaving behind something familiar. Because in the end, you deserve peace, you deserve respect, and you deserve to be loved, not just by others but by yourself.